Good day, HR people, and welcome to a new chapter. For today, we will discuss about training designs. Specifically, our objectives are: first, to formulate measurable objectives for a training program; second, to design a training program with consideration of the training program design model; and lastly, to produce a training program that will facilitate effective learning. In designing training and development programs, it needs to achieve results for both individuals and the organization while meeting the challenges of today's fast-paced, rapidly changing learning environment. Working for an organization is a continuous learning process. Learning is a complex psychological process which could use different approaches. Therefore, designing training and development programs needs caution in order to be effective and in producing learning. As soon as training requirements has been decided using the fitting needs analysis or the conduct of training needs analysis, when training objectives and priorities can be done, use a gap analysis, which is the distance between where an organization is with its employees' competencies and where it needs to be. In order to close this gap, training objectives and priorities are then identified. So the use of training gaps analysis is for you to analyze or to know what are the needed knowledge or skills and attitude to be developed. So there are three types of training objectives that can be set as important elements in training and development. It is the first element, which is the knowledge, which conveys cognitive information and details to trainees. Second is skill. It develops behavior modification on how jobs and various task requirements are executed. And lastly is the attitude. It generates concern in and consciousness of the importance of training. Okay, for example, let's say an HR assistant is sent to a customer relation training. Fundamentally, the HR assistant will learn the basic steps and processes on how to attend to customer concerns, including proper endorsement to concerned people and the basic documents needed to attend to requests of the customers. Those things are knowledge-focused. When the trainee learn how to properly communicate to customers, how to handle complaints, and how to compose himself despite of pressures, that develops trainee's skills. And lastly, if the trainee is able to develop his behavior to extent that he is able to sympathize or put himself on the shoe of the customers, he is able to develop his attitude. This is a clear example on how training develop a trainee's whole being. At the same time, these objectives must be measured because this determine the success of the undertakings. These objectives must be internalized, which means that the person really learned and is able to use the learning. In measuring the outcomes of objectives, we must apply the SMA, or objectives must be specific, measurable, and attainable. Specific means that the objective should be a clear-cut and to the point, without leaving a lot of room for vagueness. Second, it should be measurable. This can be more difficult but very helpful to develop objectives. A measurable objective is something that can be quantitatively described. Achieving these objectives helps both trainers and trainees leave the session with a better feeling of achievement. And lastly, attainable. It is best to obtain some relatively simple objectives. Unrealistic objectives will leave everyone involved frustrated. Since training uses unlimited training budget and organizations have multiple training needs, there is a specific or a necessity to prioritize. Preferably, management links training needs to strategic organizational plans and a part of organizational change processes. Therefore, the training needs could be prioritized based from organizational objectives. Doing the training most required to improve organizational performance will generate visible outcomes more swiftly. Example of SMA application. An HR department will go digital transformation by integrating HRIS into their operation. Basically, Your objectives must see that all of your HR people will learn how to navigate the system, and that is specific. If ever there are some who cannot or who are not capable of learning to run the system, it is measurable and easy to point out how many percentages passed and how many needs more enhancement. And lastly, it is realistic to set that 100% of HR members will have the same understanding of the know-how of the system, including how to control and how to troubleshoot. The best way to measure the impact of training is after the training conduct and a span of time while HR is actually running and using the system already. Both of the understanding of the trainee about the training and the effectiveness of the installed training will be measured simultaneously. Okay? So I hope I am clear in the discussion on the discussion of the fundamental elements of training and development, which are the KSA and the SMA. So for now, let's move to the discussion of training designs. Training design can commence after training objectives have been determined. Training design must attend to the specific objectives. Effective training designs reflects on the learner's instructional strategies and how best to transfer the training from class to workplace. There are three different categories that are important to effectively design training. The first one is learner's characteristic. Learners must be ready and able to learn to make training successful. Readiness of learners means trainees must have the ability to learn, which everyone has. Trainees too should possess the motivation to learn, have self-efficacy, see the value in learning, and have a learning style that tailors the training. I would like to highlight the word readiness. In taking a training, it is a must that a trainee is very much willing, he is interested and ready. A prepared learner will do whatever it takes to finish the training. So it is a must that he is interested to undergo the training. Second is instructional strategies. Part of designing training is to choose the right combination of strategies that can fit the learner's characteristic. The strategies depend on the trainee's characteristic because there are some trainees that can easily learn, for example, through visual presentation. There are some who can learn through hands-on or workshop. So it is also important to assess first the type of learning style of the trainee to ensure that they can easily cope up with the discussion. And lastly is the transfer of learning. This happens when learner actually used on the job what knowledge and information they learned from the training. Effective transfer of training meets two situations. One is that trainees take the material learned in training and apply it to the job context in the workplace, and another is that employees maintain their use of learned material eventually. So there is retention on it. This talks about the most convenient way to deliver the training, from the kind of training approach to the style of lecturing to the facility to be used to the delivery of the speaker and many more. These are important considerations because it creates impacts to the understanding of trainees. Specifically, a number of things that can enhance the transfer of training, like first, offer trainees with overview of the training content and how it connects to the strategy of the organization. From that moment that they have absorbed the content, they can raise their interest on it. Second is to ensure that training reflects to the job context. So they must understand that it is applicable and relevant to their position. Third, supervisors must support new trainees to use their new skills upon returning to job, because it should be expected that upon training, they have the responsibility to apply it at work and they can influence the others. Fourth, there must be an opportunity to use the training in the workplace. And lastly, peers and supervisor must expect that the learners to use the new skill in the workplace and holds them accountable in using it. So there should have a raise of responsibility. Okay. When designing a training program, there are a number of considerations. Training is an activity that should be designed and developed in advance. The considerations for designing a training program are as follows. Number 1 is needs assessment and learning objectives. So you have to really set your objective based on the output of the TNA. Second, consideration of learning styles. Second, delivery mode. So what is the best technique to get message across and to be understood by the learner? Is it through web-based or will it be through physical contact? Fourth, and most important, budget. How much funds is to be spent on the training if the company is capable of spending? Fifth, delivery style. Is the training self-paced or instructor-led? Because usually at this point of time, we use independent or flexi-learning, wherein we utilize it through web, through modules. So if that is applicable, then we can pursue it. If not, then we can choose another style. 6 is audience. Who will be participating in this training? Because not all topics are applicable to the training. 7 is content. What needs to be trained? How will it be sequence of the information? 8 is timeliness. How long will it take to design the training? Is there a deadline for training to be accomplished? Next is communication. How will employees know the training is available to them? So there should have a dissemination and proper communication of the notice of the training. And lastly is measuring effectiveness of training. How will the organization know if training has worked? What ways to use to measure this effectiveness? So we will have a separate discussion on training evaluation. In theory, training design is a quite easy task. In actuality, there are numerous constraints to overcome all through the training design processes. There are many ways in which these constraints may manifest, and all of them are challenged to conquer. Some are not totally likely to overcome, while others need cause to defeat. The most challenging restraint to face is a restricted budget. Even if the organization has allocated a generous training budget, it will still seem as if there isn't a sufficient fund. There is a continuous drive in business to do more with less, so the feeling underfunded will always be experienced. The next giant restriction to face is choosing who gets the training and the extent of training each person gets. This restriction also binds to the limited budget. In a perfect world, everyone must be given all the training they want. But because of the inadequate resources, decisions have to be made and to choose only limited person to be placed on the training. With the budget, there is a need to prioritize the types of training to deliver so that training can be used most effectively and most efficiently throughout the organization, and who needs it the most urgent. Okay? Another obstacle to confront is the differing knowledge, skills, and attitudes, or the KSA level of the trainees. The training must be designed appropriately to be effective for all these different trainees and still work within the budget. Still another is the overload of people with defined roles in the training process. These people can be leaders of small study groups or individuals whom the other request advice on a subject they are doing extremely well. The demand and momentum and sharing of knowledge is placing more stress on them. The only solution to this problem is to redirect some of the workload. Because sometimes if there are so many positions to be trained and then there are only limited slots for the training, so the tendency is there will be infighting within the employees. These are just few of the many forms organizational constraints in design training. It is best to be conscious of them and know how to come ready and to act in response. Okay? So I would like to conclude this lesson by giving these 3 important factors that must be prioritized when designing training. We HR practitioners must bear in mind that it is our responsibility to ensure that training would benefit the people in all aspects. The first focus is variation in KSAs among the trainees. While the majority of trainees will have similar basic KSAs, there will be some variation that will create a challenge during the training design stage. There is a call for considering all of this likely variation when designing training so the final product will be helpful for all trainees. In short, assess the capability of the learning. Assess what kind of knowledge, skills, and attitudes you want to improve to a person, and that shall be focused on your objective in conducting the training. We want people to be developed in all aspects. Put that in mind. Second is diversity in motivation levels among the trainees. The training designer must develop a training program that remains the trainees motivated to learn. One of the biggest aspects to focus on is job relevance. Motivated trainees can drop motivation hastily if they think the training is not actually applicable to their jobs. So it should be in line. We want to motivate people. We would motivate them for the given chance to be developed or to develop themselves, and at the same time to see them having better performance in their jobs. And lastly is we want them to have a sense of development within themselves. So they should have a goal setting among trainees. Individual goal setting can help a trainee obtain more out of training, which will direct to better consequences for the organization. Learning objectives aid trainees set goals because they kindle the trainees as to what they should be receiving out of the program. So to fill in the gap on what they actually need, they will grow as a person and as a professional. Okay? So we are done discussing training designs. I hope you were able to understand what are the components or what are the focus of the training, what are the things to be considered, and what are the constraints to be faced and to be solved. So if you have questions, clarifications, do not hesitate to approach me, message me, and that's it. Thank you so much for listening and have a great day.